back to international news. So there's a great article from The Intercept by Glenn Greenwald that discusses the increase, the skyrocketing number of civilian casualties underneath the Trump administration. I'm going to pull up the first graphic on your screen. You can see, actually switch to the other graphic for me. This particular graphic, this comes from the article in The Intercept. Be sure to go over there and check it out. You can see in January, February, March, you see a dramatic increase in the number of alleged civilian deaths. You can see the color coordination, color code at the bottom that shows you that the green line, they are contested. And then, of course, the ones that are confirmed are brown. However, there are a significant increase. Now, a big thing to note, October, November, there was an uptick underneath President Obama. So there was an uptick underneath President Obama at the end of his term in terms of civilian casualties, but now we see it skyrocketing. This is important for a couple of reasons, observations that I made, but also that you can find in this article. Donald Trump made it clear that he wanted to bomb the hell out of quote unquote ISIS. He's carrying out his promises, right? He's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. There's also conversations about the change in the rules of operation, right? Of the manner in which they are allowed to engage, rules of engagement, rather, the manner in which they're allowed to engage, and the strenuous nature, the strenuous restrictions that are placed on our military to avoid civilian casualties. There's been conversations from the Trump administration about loosening those restrictions so that they are more free to carry out their bombing campaigns indiscriminately. And we see the results of this so far. Another part of the article that I think was great is because it really dissects this ideology that Donald Trump seems to have convinced Americans with, that he's a non-interventionist. And they mistake, according to Greenwald, they mistake non-interventionism as pacifism. But it's a very specific style of non-interventionism that is as hawkish as almost any other ideology, particularly because any perceived threat, any desire to spread or fight back, rather, against an ideology that they feel is a threat, they take off the gloves and they go in the most barbaric fashion. Political commentators, particularly some on the left, have misconstrued this non-interventionism promise as pacifism, and they've convinced themselves that Donald Trump is somehow going to be different on the international stage. Yes, he has become different than President Obama in the sense that he is killing a lot more people, a lot more civilians. There are some discussions, debate about the root cause of the increase in the casualties, particularly this battle for Mosul. They're in the side of the city now. They're in the portion of the city that is still obviously held by ISIS, but the civilian population is much higher. In fact, the bombing that this article is about, the bombing took place March 17th. 100 of the 101 people who have been confirmed killed were pulled out of a single building. In fact, the second graphic that we'll pull up on your screen shows you that even in the midst of a decrease in the number of airstrikes in the region, you have an increase in the number of civilian casualties. You can bring that up on your screen now. So you can see as of March, you have a decrease in the number of strikes on the far right end of this graph. In Iraq and Syria, a dramatic decrease in the number of airstrikes, but yet and still we see a dramatic increase in the number of alleged civilian deaths. So what is that? How do you interpret that? You interpret that as to say we're doing fewer strikes, but those strikes, if we are underneath this new Trump doctrine, if you want to call it that, the restrictions that are placed and the level of scrutiny that's placed on the decision to make an airstrike and the calculation of the number of civilian deaths that are possible have been loosened. And so even though we may have fewer strikes as of right now, we certainly have an uptick in the number of civilians that have been killed. The major takeaway from this is, if we are opposed to interventionism in general, if we're opposed to collateral damage, civilian deaths, if we're opposed to any of these things that we complained about underneath, and we protested and we talked about underneath President Obama, we are entering into a phase where Donald Trump, who made it clear that he wanted to be far more barbaric than President Obama, he is actually carrying out that policy. And so we 100% have to be just as vocal and loud against Donald Trump's barbaric reign, which we can't even really, it is a continuation of American policy, but it's clearly an escalation. And so we have to address it as such.